Our next speaker discovered a way to make an old diesel vehicle operate better by mixing used cooking oil with diesel as fuel. He dropped out of London School of Commerce in 2010 and returned to Malaysia to start up his business of turning waste oils into biofuel. 10 years later, this business, which he founded, has become a robust and reliable supplier of ready-to-use biofuel and biofuel feedstock to global market. Here to speak to us about utilizing Malaysia's untapped materials in Economy 2.0 while combating global climate change, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome founder and CEO of FatHopes Energy, Vinesh Sinha.
Thank you very much, Edmund. It's a real pleasure to be here. Getting into the presentation today and the topic, before I actually comment, I actually want to share a short little story of how we got started and why the name is FatHopes Energy. Back in the day, 2006, 2007, I was given a diesel vehicle as my first car. And it was a 20-year-old vehicle, which was not very fancy. And at that point, with the peer pressure, it was always a comparison. And the learning that I had early on is that the comparison must go beyond what meets the eye. And what I mean by this was I was exposed to a scenario where just because the vehicle was not the latest and not the newest, it was shunned. But I grew up north in Penang, and whenever we had to have trips down to KL for F1, for whatever activities, the diesel car would be the choice. And that's merely because it cost a lot less to operate a diesel vehicle, significantly less to operate a diesel vehicle. And that was the first realization that when there is an economic incentive or there's an economic savings, what meets the eye takes the back seat. And for me, at that point, I was already very exposed to the plight of global warming and climate change. And I realized that the best way to combat or to mitigate global warming and climate change would be to come up with an economically incentivized formula or model that will make it propagate further. So on that vehicle, I experimented on running the car on partial used cooking oil, partial diesel. And to my surprise, it worked. And because of that, I started, it was a cottage industry sort of being done DIY for myself during school. And that expanded a little bit to a few other vehicles of my peers and my peers' parents. And then I left Malaysia for the UK, as mentioned by Edmund. And when I arrived there, there was biodiesel at the pump. And in Malaysia, there was no awareness of biodiesel yet. And I didn't know what I was doing was biodiesel or anywhere close to biodiesel. 3 months after I had arrived, on the front page of the newspaper was a 30 pence homebrew fuel tax. So people who made fuel at home were taxed 30 pence. And that was really the deciding factor for me. I decided that this has got legs and it's going to move, or I believe it's going to move, it's going to scale. So I decided to drop out of school and started focusing on building an enterprise back in Malaysia. And I coined the name FatHopes Energy because the number of people that were pessimistic about the idea were way more than the people who were optimistic. And a lot of people told me Fat Hopes. And incredibly, when I thought about it, that's exactly what we're doing. We have the hope to create energy from fat, because technically we're converting fats, oil and grease into a renewable or diesel replacement. So that's a little bit of how we got started. And the reason why we got started. Now, from a personal perspective, this picture is a hard reality of every one of our behaviors. We need to take responsibility for it, and we cannot have the attitude that it's somebody else's problem. I think that psychology or that attitude is what's resulted or what's led us to where we are today. It's always somebody else's problem. I am not as developed, or I do not have the resource. But I think that the solution really lies by looking within instead of looking out and blaming. And for the context of Malaysia, we've got a lot to lose if we do not consider or we do not look into trying to mitigate global warming and climate change. On the left, you would see that we are poised to have up to a 1.5 degree Celsius increase, and that would directly impact our GDP. And if you look on the right, Malaysia would be one of the countries with the highest impact to GDP due to climate change and global warming. And this is pretty startling because a lot of us don't realize how and why. The main reason this stat is the way it is because a lot of our agriculture is coastal agriculture. And with the rise of temperatures, you will have the rise of seawater levels. And the rise of seawater levels, even a meter, brings salination into our water tables. And that means that the water we use for irrigation for our agriculture will be, the pH level would have changed. And that would definitely impact yields of agriculture. So it's not just about crashing and burning. It's not just about haze. It's not just about tsunamis or drastic events. These events creep up on us. And if we are not careful and we don't watch our back, by the time it's hit us, it's too late. So for me, I think that there are many of statistics that I've seen that have driven us to do what we do, but this is one of the scariest or most drastic ones, which I think we should all pay great attention to. Now, having said that, I look at it as an opportunity because with the reduction in economic output of business as usual, we should really look at the possibility and the opportunity of creating new models that are inclusive and multi-stakeholder and multi-bottom line. That's what I aspire to do in any one of the businesses I get into. How can we be economically viable, but yet socially and environmentally responsible at the same time? And I see over the past decade that there are more and more such models that come out. We are shy today to actually come out with predatory business models. It's less and less, and it used to be a norm where we take advantage of stakeholders to capitalize profitability. Today, we don't have that conscience anymore, and it's depleting, it's coming down. And that, I think, needs to be rampant. It needs to come in faster and at a wider scale and impact everybody. So what does FatHopes Energy do? We pride ourselves with being the world's first green oil well producer. We're essentially an oil and gas company. We produce a diesel replacement, but we do it 100% renewable and 100% sustainable. And we do this through creating green oil wells that convert waste into energy streams. Right? So we develop sustainable fat, oil, and grease solutions for the purpose of environmentally responsible biofuels production. Now, this statement does multiple things at one stroke. Number one is in Asia, waste oil was very widely recycled back into new cooking oil. If you go to the Pasar Malam in Malaysia today, you would see the packets of oil, the translucent packets, 1 kilo packets of oil. A big majority of them are actually waste oil reblended with new oil and going back into the food stream. And this is done essentially to capitalize or to maximize profitability, but it's carcinogenic and it's extremely harmful. If you've been tracking cancer cases in Malaysia, we are becoming more aware. I know people who stopped smoking, but cancer cases are still on the incline. And we need to ask these difficult questions. Why is it so? Right? So I believe that it's consumer behavior, it's consumption patterns that we are not aware of, or that we are subconsciously not really thinking about it, but we're continuously going on to consume. So we decided to divert these waste materials away from the food stream and towards an energy resource that will be burnt, and that will be the proper disposal. So social sustainability or benefit was a big driving factor for us. How do we take out these carcinogenic materials from the food supply chain? Number two, of course, was the environment. How can we have less emissions while having the same amount of energy? Because energy is quintessential to a development of a nation. But how can we do both of this profitably? And the main reason the profitably was a big requirement is because it's hard to scale when you're not profitable. Till recent times, venture capital shied away from such businesses. But yeah, profitability will determine scalability. Right. So our vision is really to accelerate the advance of drop-in sustainable biofuels. And drop-in to us is very important because it's easy to try and reinvent or rethink the energy supply chain. But the asset reinvestment and scrapping of old technology is something that the consideration for the environment is not taken into play. So for us, we try to build solutions that you might be actually using without you knowing you're using it, because then it's seamless. And the reluctance for adoption is almost invisible. And we do that by constantly developing solutions around fat, oil, and grease, predominantly waste, right? So what we do is we build waste management solutions, and we deal with this across the board, B2B predominantly, but also B2C, from factories to fast food chains. We come up with solutions that it's a lot easier and a lot more convenient for them to use, and that results in the waste oil or waste being aggregated, where then it is purified and converted into a resource that is fungible, and we supply these materials onto oil and gas companies globally to fit into their supply chain, so that distribution again is seamless. So we're really behind the scenes, but we grow an entire supply chain infrastructure that enables big oil to actually opt to go sustainable very quickly, very easily, and all we need then is will, right? Business will. So moving on, how do we do what we do? We've approached it in a very different way, right? So our solutioning has been very tech-driven. It's been very infrastructure intensive, and it's very pervasive across the geographies. We set up support structures for all of our stakeholders, and that enable them to do the collection and aggregation of these materials. We then refine those materials, and we report to global standards on what the impact has been, positive or negative, that give stakeholders then the opportunity to find the impetus to continue doing the best way it should. So we're digitally native. We've built an app that enables all of the individuals that have waste oil to sign up to it and to opt in to dispose with us. And we have a back-end driver app as well, where we connect individuals who want to dispose to individuals who we have provided the infrastructure. So we've built an entire network of entrepreneurs that come to us. We provide them the entire infrastructure of the trucks, of the digital platform, the working capital that's required, and many of them today make in excess of 19 to 20,000 ringgit. Essentially, acting in between us, the aggregator, and the producer. And we've created some really exciting fleet where it's very different and they get noticed, and we promote them very heavily. So that's one big aspect of our business. And the second aspect of our business is where we rethought how we aggregate oil across the world. Many of the times you would see that you would have a dirty, ugly drum at the back of an outlet. And when the outlet is done with their frying oil in their fryer, they'll have to wait for the oil to cool, and then they'll have to use a mug and scoop it out of the fryer and pour it into the drum. And that way just didn't sit well with us, right? So the first thing we needed to look at is how do we improve staff safety? because a lot of people were getting burnt. Turnover in outlets were high because the person who is the most junior will be doing the dirtiest job. And that's where they had a high rate of turnover. So what you see in the slide here is a system that we call iTank. It's an intelligent tank. It has a pump on board. It's portable so that the staff do not need to carry heavy drums, and they do not need to wait for the oil to cool. So what now happens is when you're ready to dispose your oil, you push this tank to the fryer, you turn on the pump, you suck out the oil the moment it's done because the entire system deals with the oil hot. So the outlets then have minimized fryer downtime and maximized the size of the kitchen, or maximize the space that they have, because they've been able to shrink the kitchen by about 30% because they need less fryers, because we minimize fryer downtime. And this means the capital expenditure on their outlets are less, and they've got more sellable area outside for customers to sit. So we looked at a way that we could maximize space and yield for F&B operators. We looked for a way that we could improve the safety of the outlets. And after we were able to achieve these two things, we then looked at what do we need to implement to strengthen the biofuel industry. And what that resulted in, it's a fully integrated system with an IoT device that essentially triggers us or reports to us daily what the fill level are of these tanks. And the reason this is important is our buyers and our consumers are in Europe. And there's one question they always ask, is this really used cooking oil or is it palm oil? But if you have tanks that are IoT enabled, you can actually access our platform and look through the supply chain before the cargo is shipped out to you, validate the supply chain, and verify that it's the material that you want to use. So we actually created a preemptive audit process instead of a retrospective audit process that creates the highest level of integrity and transparency for reporting. We are present across Southeast Asia at the moment, very strong in Malaysia and Singapore. We operate in multi-jurisdictions and we are able to scale in multi-jurisdictions due to our entrepreneurship program. It's a very similar concept to Uber and Grab, but it is for physical product instead of an individual, and it's reverse. We don't do delivery, we do pickups. So it's a very peculiar or very unique business. It's a business that is very logistics intensive and chemistry centered, and something that honestly, if I knew before I started, I would have probably not started. And the reason I'm saying this is entrepreneurship for me is the solution to the biggest problems that the world faces today. That's my view. And the second point I think is that there's never a right time for us to start. There's never a right person that should take up the challenge. All of us have an equal part to play in the solutioning, and I think we need to have a higher level of courage than we usually do in taking up these challenges. Now, as I've been saying, our entire model is centered around the three spheres of sustainability, or the three spheres of sustainability that we believe. And for me and for our business, it needs to be economic, social, and environmental in that set order, because we need to be profitable and we need to have stakeholders that are taken care of. Only when these two are achieved can we be able to actually contribute towards positive impact of the environment. Our people are one of our biggest assets, and the team is extremely young. I started off this business at the age of 17, and I have got this belief that if I can do it, anybody can. I do not have a pre-qualification. I do not have preconceived notions of I need to have these qualifications for someone to do this job. And we have some ridiculous stories within the business. We have got a corporate communications graduate that actually does very technical work. So for me, it's really the will and the commitment to what we believe is right. And anyone can go out there and create a very, very positive difference in the world. We've formed a few very strong partnerships, and one of our key partnerships is with British Petroleum, who takes up a lot of what we produce. They consume it in their supply chains, and recently the sustainable fuel that we produce has been further converted to sustainable aviation fuel and used within airlines as well. So it's becoming really pervasive. We serve some of the biggest brands across the region, and we're very proud to be able to be a small little business that have got key principles that we do not waver from, that show these companies that we can be dependent on and we do things the right way. So with that, thank you very much, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity.